sponsored by Remote Plats. We'll talk about efficient task breakdown, agile approach for seamless delivery, and let's start then. So let me present myself first. So my name is Marco de Freitas, Marco in English, if you prefer the pronunciation. Remote software developer, 12 years of experience, more or less. Been working remotely since 2017. Agile software development has always been a part of my preferred development style. I work mostly with .NET and JavaScript. I dabble a little bit on DevOps on the side. I'm a people and team-focused player, so that will have some emphasis also on this approach that we'll see. And I work from Tavira in the sunny Algarve in the south of Portugal. Google it, it's really nice if you want to come and visit. So today I'm going to present you two techniques that I usually try to present to teams that I see that struggle more with task breakdown. They don't know the best way to approach it. They actually yield quite good results, and you can use them either separate or combine. I guess that's something that you have to decide if it fits your team or not. But let's start. So what is the common problem that we are faced nowadays with task breakdown on most scenarios? It's usually based on estimation, whether it's t-shirt size or points, it's estimation. And if you look at the definition of estimation by Cambridge Dictionary, it says that to say what you believe is the size or value of something you are not certain of. So that actually tells me that it's something that you cannot use as a reliable measurement. So given that, it's not something you want to use on your task breakdown. And it has a couple of other side effects as well. For the team, it's mostly disclosure of what the values mean. So you have to be very upfront of what they mean. And usually, by my experience, each team has a different meaning for either t-shirt size or points. Sometimes point size are used as hours, sometimes as days. So it can be very much confusing. For junior members who have never seen any kind of these techniques and are not taught on university or any technical program, it's especially struggling for them. And it's very unpractical, especially when you join a new project. I've been there myself a few times, and it's always awkward when someone asks me, how can you give me an estimate right now if you don't know anything? Well, I can't. It's you don't have the domain knowledge, you don't have the knowledge of the code base. Then it becomes a little bit of peer pressure games to know exactly what's on your mind. And that usually leads to a bit of conflict. People think that you are either overestimating or underestimating, and that's not a good thing. Your team becomes a little bit conflicted in that sense. So to approach the problem, I'm gonna I'm gonna use an example scenario, very simple. So it's a really simplistic scenario. It's to log in your Gmail account to access your inbox. So I've written down a user story. As a Gmail user, I want to access my inbox so that I can view my unread messages. The context is very simple. You want to access your box, you have to be authenticated. On this case, we're only caring about validating empty usernames or passwords, so it has to show some validation message if you hit the next button and then there's no input there on the text fields. But there's no validation whatsoever for the email address or phone number format, so that means no regular expressions or whatever to support those cases. And the acceptance criteria is also very simple. Does it show you a validation for the empty username and password? And does it display the unread messages when you access the inbox? So it's very, very simple. Now, the first technique, I call it the flow approach. By flow, we're referring to the scenario or a path, and we will see how that works. So how does it work? We start by breaking a work item, a compound work item. That means that it's a work item that contains a lot of information. It can be all the possible paths even. And then you start to split it path by path. If you want to understand how to write a path to get a more descriptive idea, I suggest to look at Gherkin's reference for concrete examples. So that's something that is usually used on BDD, and it can become quite practical when you're trying to understand the scenarios to take. So let's look at the example of that Gmail account that we just saw. And there's at least a couple of paths that we can break down from that. And as a tip, I'm going to say that the sequence that we're going to look at is a bit important to understand this. So the first path is actually the validation of the empty email or phone number. So you design the screen, it has the Google logo, it has all these buttons and the next button that will trigger the validation. So we only care that if it's not, if the input loses focus, if it doesn't have any text, or you click on next button, it just triggers this validation message, and that's it. The second path that you can take, which would be the second work item, would be the validation of the empty password. So if you already built the first one, and when you build the second one, you're going to add the routing, it's going to pick up some data from the backend, and it's going to do the same kind of validation that you do on the first one. So empty field loses focus or clicking on the next button, it triggers that validation. And the third one is also very simple. So it's the happy path. You've already built the first screen, so you don't have to worry about validations because we're not caring about that. The second screen is also already built. It already has the functionality required to pick up some of the user data and show it. And when you click on next, then you are routed to your inbox. So it should present all the unread emails, the current state. So it also has a little bit of backend data on that as well. So you've actually used the first two tasks in order to achieve the happy path. So it diminishes the amount of effort that you need to put into place. Now, when doing any of this, I'm keeping in mind that we're considering tests part of our definition of done. So I always consider tests part of it, and any necessary documentation, build or release pipelines. So that's also taken into account. But that also depends on the definition of done on your side, on your team. With this approach, we don't need to estimate, right? We just break it down into separate required use cases. It's just scenarios. So it becomes much easier to understand without having an interpretation for the estimation points or t-shirt size or whatever it is that you use. And this can also be applied to purely technical cases. It makes no distinction. So you can actually break down a technical task into small parts of the flow that you're trying to build. Can it be even on backend or even with databases? It's still valid. You can still break it down into small chunks and achievements. So as advantages that we can see from this approach, there's a couple of them that I really like to reinforce. So the implementation time becomes much lower instead of building something that is much larger. The cognitive load that you get on a pull request, and this is extremely important, is actually lower. So if you're building just one path and adding only the required scenarios tests for this, then it becomes much easier to understand and review the code. The feedback loop is also faster, whether it's on your team's communication messages or on the pull request, since it's very objective what you're trying to achieve. And it's also faster to deliver to production since you're only delivering small chunks. Now, there's another point that's also important, that every team member has a chance to touch different domains. This is especially important if you're trying to break down silos of knowledge and have domain awareness. Even for your dailies, this can break down into, instead of saying what you did yesterday, you can just say what you're going to pick up today, because it's becoming more and more aware of what you're working on. And your refinements are faster because you don't have any need to estimate. Those are the best advantages of going with this approach. Now, with everything else said, there's a couple of disadvantages, right? There's no such thing as free lunches. So one of the biggest one is that you will have many work items on your backlog. If you're breaking down to very small chunks, that's a given. If you have a team that's very competent and disciplined, probably they will find this approach a bit cumbersome because they cannot put a high workload instead of short bursts. And this can also lead to many code reviews a day. So this means that there will probably be a higher rate of gatekeeping, depending on how fast you can move. And one of the worst disadvantages is actually that you can get to the end of the day without any closure. What does this mean? It means that your mental well-being, your psychological safety, if you want, is very important. So if you finish the day by leaving your task still in progress, there's a slight chance that your subconscious is still going to work on that, you know. And I guess many of us who are developers go through this, and it's quite important that you reach the end of the day with your tasks done. Now, picking up on that line of thought, the next technique actually is a follow-up to the flow approach. I picked this one from my certified Scrum product owner training, and I find it to be one of the best techniques to use for task breakdown. It's called one-day work items. How do they work? Well, it's very simple. You start every day with one task. It doesn't mean at all that you pick up a task from the day before. No, it's a new task every day, and you finish that task by the end of the day. We're still considering tests to be part of the task, so they are still part of our definition of done, just like I mentioned before. And one of the best tips that I can give for this approach is actually to combine multiple flows incrementally until you have a fine-grained view of your capacity. This means adding, instead of going with one flow, adding another one or two mores, and you will actually start to see if you are over or under your actual capacity. That's a really neat way of understanding how much we can do per week, per sprint, depending on how you work. Now, if we look at the example of that user story with 3 flows, we could actually feel pretty bold enough to take them as a one-day work item. In terms of advantages, I see the same advantages as the flow approach, as you can see on the left side on green, but I also see a couple of more, meaning you get to generate more balanced work items. So instead of having small delivery, it's a more balanced delivery. It's something like a mid-sized delivery. You're delivering much more. It's going to be delivered faster as well, because you're not going to have so much gatekeeping. It's going to go all on one PR. And for a high capacity, highly disciplined team, this is actually going to be a very, very pleasant approach, because the team will be most of the time busy, and they will see each other's code, and they will review and work that collaboration with more excitement, because you're delivering more at the time and you're actually able to review more code at the time. They feel very much pleased. And the best part is that you end the day with closure. You don't leave any leftovers. It's really exciting to see that happening. In my experience, I worked with such a kind of team once, and from an 8 hours day of 8 hours of work, we would finish half an hour earlier every day, and that would give us a chance to talk about whatever we wanted, or just go out for a beer and relax. And that brings a much better collaboration. Even if you're working remotely, you can enjoy that free time with your loved ones or with your team. And it was very, very fine. But like the other approach, it has its own set of disadvantages. So it does require a high commitment from the team. It doesn't work at all for undisciplined teams. I've tried this with one or other team, and it's really an impediment for them. Teams that can't commit, don't have much ownership, they find this a bit struggling. It's going to enforce a bit of synchronous communication, probably the first times, because you have to communicate more, there's more to do, and Sometimes you may feel the pressure of delivering, and that's fine. And it will put a bit of additional stress on the team that in turn can also affect morale. But this doesn't mean that it does affect morale. It just depends on the type of team you're working with. And you're gonna need a couple of times to try it out until you reach that fine-grained view capacity. Now, as some side notes, I'd like to point out some of the things that we've already mentioned. So you have to know your team before proposing any of these techniques. That's a given. But you can also try and mixing them. This means that you can also be working with your current way of working and add either the flow approach or something that's really unsecured, you're not very sure of the domain, or you can even add the one-day items for something that you guys are domain experts. So that would be my approach on those cases, to try it out. Take your time, don't rush things, don't put additional pressure, unnecessary pressure on the team if you want to try this out, and listen to the feedback. It's extremely important that we listen to the feedback of everyone and try to understand their hardships, their impediments while trying things out and see what is their blockers. And if you fail, try until you see that it works or it doesn't. If it doesn't work, it's fine. Failures are actually the building blocks for success. So you can try again in the near future. And even if you're working as a fully async team and considering one working day as a 24-hour period that extends over multiple time zones, this can actually work depending on how your team synchronizes your processes, but it's still applicable. And there's also an expected output in terms of tasks done. So that means that every time you would commit to either technique, I would expect you to have some sort of initial commitment, then you would overcommit and undercommit, and this would be your kind of discovery phase. So you would start seeing where is my fine-grained view capacity, and it would end up something like here. So this would be more the expected output, either week by week or sprint by sprint. Now, before we go into our Q&A, I'd just like to give you a quick couple overview. So we've seen two techniques, the flow approach and one-day items. They can be they can be used together or in separate. They deliver small to mid value per task, depending on which one you choose. The main goal is still to get shit done. And the level of commitment is high, but you carry less risk per task on either one of them. And the best achievement that you get on either technique is that you get the whole team to cooperate. You start to break those domain knowledge barriers, those silos of knowledge, and that's a really good achievement. And now I'm going to ask you guys if you have any thoughts on the presentation. If there are any CTOs or product owners with questions, developers, feel free to drop them.
You guys having any questions, feel free to ask to Marco.
Yes, I think Naf is raised his hand, right?
Yeah, very, very nice presentation. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Naf. Thank you, Nafis. I like yours as well. Yes, Muhammad.
Yeah, first and foremost, I want to thank you for this wonderful presentation. Actually, I'm a software developer, and at times I used to find difficulty breaking down my tasks, but this has been a huge heads up for me, which that's the reason why I said thank you for this wonderful presentation. So I just want to thank you for that.
Good to know. Thank you. Any additional questions? Well, if no one has any additional questions, then no. Yes,
Rizwan Ahmad having question.
Rizwan.
Marco, very good presentation. So I had a slight confusion. Sorry if I may have missed that. But in your presentation, you started with one of the problems that we face with normal flow is time estimation. So I'm sorry if I've missed that, but if you have already answered it somewhere, uh, I think we're still left with that answer to that. How do we give an estimation of time, even if we break down the tasks?
Well,
So,
sure.
quick overview, yeah. Thanks.
You don't give an estimation of time. You start to see the capacity of your team by work items. So instead of going with, we're able to deliver or do 50 hours of development per sprint, per week, whatever it is, you say, we're able to do these many items per sprint. And that gives you, the development team, a capability of saying if you're capable of not. It's not an initial observation, initial estimation, if you want to call it, uh, that is very reassuring because you're still not working fully with either technique, but in time you will be able to see what you can do in terms of work items and what needs to be delivered. So you will break it down into that capacity. Not sure if this answers your question.
Yeah. Sorry. So you mean that you don't worry about the time at all? You just worry about the tasks and say, okay, this we're gonna do this many tasks in this uh,
In this
sprint
time,
per
yeah, in the
sprint.
sprint, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but don't you still have that issue of even in your own self, in your own team, uh, coming up with an estimate? Okay, can we do this many tasks in this sprint, or does it kind of like incremental kind of thing where you just build upon your experience, even if you miss the deadline? Let's say you promise 10, you say, okay, we deliver 3 tasks in this sprint, and you're not able to deliver those 3 tasks, and they turn out to be difficult than you originally thought. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I mean, there's still no, despite having less risk as an assessment, you still have to deliver and you're still going to fail. There's nothing that can help you not fail. Uh, that has happened to us, to me before. It's nothing that I don't see as alarming, but you still have your accountability and you're still the one doing that. So you have to find out why it happened. Did you overestimate? Did you underestimate? It's still the same principle of having the accountability for what happened. It's not going to solve all those problems because that's part of us as humans, but it does help diminish the risk of not delivering, sorry.
Yep, no worries. Thanks, mate. Thanks. Makes
No
sense.
worries. Good. I think we have also Mohammed, right?
Mohammed Morad. Yeah, please go on.
Yes, okay, quickly. Thank you so much for this helpful presentation. I have a question. How would you put estimations on tasks that you might not be involved with? Like tasks or user story that from back-end sides only, so on. Also, is it by getting used using or getting used on it, or how we could put estimations on this? I
So,
don't.
so, so we're talking about some sort of purely technical task, right?
Yes, that you might not be involved. Some user stories you might not be completely involved in, but you have to put estimations on it.
I usually refuse to do that if I'm not involved in. I don't estimate, but I don't understand what if you mean by involved. Is it part of the refinement process, or what
No,
is it?
the sprint planning and so on.
Okay, but
Hmm.
but if you're not involved, then the team does that effort for you. So the team actually should be accountable for that. So they should have an idea of what it's like working with you, what you're capable of, and if all of you together can deliver, even if you're not there to give your estimation, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Sure. You're welcome. Thank you. Do we have any more questions? If I don't think so. Okay, then. If no more questions, then let's wrap it up. Thank you guys for coming. I really appreciated this. Feel free to reach out. You have my email, my LinkedIn, and my Substack as well. I'm going to start writing down some of the things that we discussed on the presentation on my Substack as well. So feel free to subscribe it to get the first issues. And thank you to Remote Splats for being able to have this. And I wish you guys a great weekend. Thank you so much again.
Thanks a lot,
Yeah.
Mark. Thanks a lot. Thank you guys for attending. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Bye bye.
Was a good presentation. Bye bye.